So this is the panel on the future of whatever large sense of media we want to use to embrace the world in which Dartmouth Broadcasting is going to have its future for the next 75 years. Minimum time frame on the future is 5 years. So 5 to 75 years is what we hope to talk about. Maybe we'll shoot a few things beyond the 75-year point. But no small fixes. We're talking big themes here. No small tweaks. But we will start out with a topic that a lot of the panel wanted to talk about the way in which people listen to what we'll call radio or its future equivalent, the listening environment, and we'll start with the hardware aspect of that, the devices by which people listen to their audio content. But in this first wave, not so much about the content, but just about how they listen mechanically with the devices, whether in a car or at home or in a dorm room, at work, or in a pedestrian mode walking around with those headphone radios or whatever, or some ungainly connection to their cell phone. And we'll begin. Tim, I think you're just back from the NAB convention. You saw some hardware there. So 2 sentences about yourself and then what you saw and what you think might be the device future.
Hi, I'm Tim Reynolds. I'm a 91. It's not counting as my first sentence. I was general manager, morning drive disc jockey when I was here. I was on the board of overseers for 14 years. Now I work in the digital media space. I handle digital marketing for broadcasters, both radio and television stations all over the country. I just recently came back from the National Association of Broadcasters show in Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, and I've been going to this show for probably over 20 years. And it started out as an engineering show where most of the attendees were engineers, and now it's a little bit more on the revenue side, but specifically with what I saw on the radio equipment side, there seems to be a resurgence this year in terms of equipment I saw. Sure, some of you may know that there's an FM radio chip in the majority of most cell phones now. It's usually disabled in most because of the carriers right now, but there is a possibility of being able to get FM radio on cell phones. It doesn't make a lot of use of the battery, it doesn't use your data plan, and there's the head of one of the large broadcast groups is really trying to start an organization, or there is an organization, to get that chip turned on. So I think it's one of my things of the future of radio going out, that there is the FM chip. I still think AM and FM, especially during emergencies, would be big, so I think that chip will be turned on, and there was a lot of equipment I saw at NAB that spoke to that. The other items I saw at NAB, the digital side of radio, digital hardware as far as the processing of the terrestrial signals, AM and FM, the ability to do music scheduling, voice scheduling, obviously everything is digital now from the start of CDs 25 years ago. Now everything's moving that direction. I think there is a benefit to that to a lot of broadcasters. It does definitely lowers your cost as far as equipment, lowers the maintenance. You can replace chips instead of tubes. But what I was most impressed with is there still is a huge amount of radio on the floor of the National Association of Broadcasters show. There's a lot of radio engineers. Just looking in preparing for this panel in terms of how people are listening to radio and how people are getting their information, there was a survey that came out a couple weeks ago done by a research company called Edison Research, and they were surveying as far as how people receive their, I guess I'll call it audio content. One stat I saw that was interesting, in 2008 they surveyed this panel in terms of people who had an AM FM radio in their home. In 2008, 21% of people had at least one AM and FM radio in their home. In 2016, it was down to 4%. Switching to the car, people listening in their cars, in terms of the audio sources in cars nowadays, what people listen to on a weekly basis, it's still very positive. 84% listen to AM/FM radio in their car at least once a week. CD player, listening to CDs was 56%. 38% was music that you owned, so that's music played through your MP3 player, through your car. Online music was 21%, and satellite, the XM radio, was 14%. So that's as of 2016. So there's still a huge amount of AM, FM listening going on in the car. I'll contradict myself in that there is also a lot of the car manufacturers aren't putting AM, FM radios as a standard piece of equipment in their car, but they are allowing, I think it's Mercedes, BMW, and I think GMC, and some of their higher end cars, they're not even putting AM, FM radio equipment into the cars. Again, that's where that cell phone chip might become more important because it'll all feed into the car's sound system. And then the other stat I will throw out is that 76% of the people surveyed in this panel do own a smartphone, 51% own tablets. So in terms of the devices of the future, I really do think it will be less about the device and just more about the general listening of the programming. And with that, I will pass it to Grant.
Yes, Grant, a couple sentences about yourself, and then we'll hear your thoughts of.
Sure. Grant Bossy, class of 94. I was a 99 rock jock, news, sports, a little bit of tech, a little bit of everything here over at Robinson Hall. Left Dartmouth in 94, went into news radio here in New Hampshire for about 5 years. Bounced back and forth between politics, campaigns, staff work. And last year, I made the forward-thinking decision to jump into print media, a very growing industry, and I'm currently the editorial page editor for the New Hampshire Union Leader and Sunday News. I don't have a lot, I'm not a hardware guy on that, but I think the important thing to remember is that we are not competing against other radio stations anymore. We are competing with everybody else's personal library. We'll be competing with podcasts. We're competing with books. I spent the ride up here I live down in Lee, New Hampshire. I spent the ride up here listening to a book and not radio. So when we think of hardware, I think radio will still primarily be most competitive in cars, and we have to target what we're doing on the terrestrial radio side for people driving around the Upper Valley in cars, and how we can make sure that that audience is still our primary audience to sell ads to, which keeps 99 Rock as something different from just Dartmouth College podcasting. Having a commercial radio station is a distinction that matters for Dartmouth College broadcasting, and when we look at the hardware side, we have to make sure that we still have a live radio signal going out into the cars in the Upper Valley. I think that is our most important piece of hardware.
Okay, on to Dhruv. A couple sentences about yourself and your thoughts.
Hi, I'm Dhruv Prasad, class of 99. I was general manager back in 97, I think, and morning drive DJ on 99 Rock. I'm co-founder of Town Square Media. It's a diversified media and entertainment company. We own 312 radio stations across the country. We're the third largest owner of broadcast radio after iHeartMedia and Cumulus. I actually run the live entertainment business at Town Square, so I produce music festivals, beer festivals, a 5K fun run series, as well as oversee our radio group. As it relates to devices, the position we've taken since we started our company in 2009 is that, except as Tim correctly pointed out in the case of emergencies, the FM and AM radio broadcast signal is, to some extent, a relic of the past. And what we focus on at our company, and what I encourage everybody in the industry to focus on, is the creation of content, irrespective of the medium or method of delivery. So whether that is coming through even before the FM chip, and I do hope Jeff Smolian at MS succeeds in getting the FM chip turned on, but even before the FM chip, whether it's through an app on your smartphone, whether it's through a desktop signal, whether it's some other form of mobile, that's really the critical item is to create compelling content that people want to engage with, irrespective of whether they're engaging with it through 99.3 FM or some other fashion.
Okay, on to our non-Dartmouth person, Sarah Ashworth.
Quite the introduction. No, I came into radio through a journalism background. I'm the news director at New Hampshire Public Radio, which is based here in Concord and which has a signal here in the Upper Valley. I also worked at Vermont Public Radio, which has a strong signal in the Upper Valley as well. So this is a part of the country that we've covered from a newsroom. And I would just say that I agree with a lot of what's been said, and these are discussions that we're having at NHPR and in the public radio system all of the time. We're thinking about how to grow our audience for the future, how to attract millennials to public radio. A lot of it has to do with devices. A lot of it has to do with thinking about driverless cars and what does that mean for, do people want to watch video, not listen to the radio? We're talking about the FM chip and how to make sure Apple and Verizon get on board with it. But then I really think that from a journalism background, I'm thinking a lot about creating that, as you mentioned, really compelling content and thinking about how people are accessing that content, that it's no longer whatever's on the radio they'll listen to. They want to listen to what they want to listen to at that moment. So very much on-demand listening and the rise of podcasting, which is really just another way of saying we're going to make these programs available on your time schedule whenever you want, not when we determine the best programming schedule is. So we're really thinking about creating more and more content that people can access whenever they want and thinking about it less as the program schedule really matters so much anymore. So that's what most of our discussions are.
Okay, and on to Gino.
It's great being at the end because I just get to listen and then hopefully not have to say as much. But during my time at Dartmouth, I was mostly in the sports department, sports director in 2004 and 2005. I actually had the luxury of volunteering at the station as an alumni the year after I graduated because I was working full-time at the Jones Media Center here at the library. So I had a lot of fun with that and then eventually landed a job in AV at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and spent 9 years there, ultimately working up to an academic technologist, so working with faculty on the integration of technology and different things in the classroom and in their teaching, which is why this is an interesting conversation because I saw the evolution of technology in that space as well in education and different devices and hardware. I'm not as familiar with the radio side, which is why it's been great to hear about the different things that are coming along, the FM chip and stuff like that. But I also feel like I have a unique perspective in terms of my listening behavior. I always thought I would be that on-demand person. I had my MP3s and I had all this other stuff, and I'm still that 84% in the car that's listening to AM and FM. And I went through a stretch where when I was driving for maybe more than 45 minutes to an hour, I would find myself falling asleep, and always thought that the solution would be to pump up whatever music I could find. And I actually found that it was talk radio that kept me awake. So I find myself listening to a lot of like NPR and sports talk radio now in the car, which I never ever thought I would do. But that's why I find this, this so fascinating now to see what the next steps are going to be. And also as an aside, what I do now is I run my own small video production company. I'm getting an assist right now from one of the Dartmouth broadcasting students at the moment, but we'll be filming all of the events throughout the weekend and make those available. But yeah, there's just a lot of technology involved in that, and people said, oh, with the evolution of the iPhone and people taking videos whenever they want, it's going to squash the video production industry because no one's going to need you anymore. And I've actually found that they need us more than ever because they get this content from cell phones and the quality isn't great and they want to do something with it, and there still seems to be a need for that traditional side of it. So maybe that's where I get my listening on the old school as well. So
All right, while you pass that back to Grant, I'll mention a little bit about my recent trip to Best Buy just to check on the situation there. Best Buy is into selling to gadget freaks, I think. So they do support HD radio, their house brand insignia. They have a moderately priced tabletop HD radio set, and they, I think, would be supportive of the FM chip if the providers are going to do their part. And I heard some really discouraging things, though, from the very, very young millennial salesperson about, people will just they'll bridge whatever audio device is actually going to produce the sound for their ears over to their cell phone and use their data plan to pull down a streaming signal of whatever station they like. So it kind of undercuts why I have a broadcasting license. And Grant, you sounded like the person who's most in favor of continuing to have a broadcasting license. So can you make a stronger case?
Well, I think difference that it provides to Dartmouth College Broadcasting. Remember, we have 4 audiences. Okay, we've got people driving around in their cars listening at work to 99 Rock. That's the audience that we sell ads to, and EBA buys ads on and, sponsors the hockey game. Our second audience is Dartmouth students that we're trying to get in the door and recruit for Dartmouth College Broadcasting because it's a student organization. The third group is Dartmouth alum around the country and the world that might be interested in the products. That's probably not going to be a live audience so much as an on-demand audience. And our fourth audience is Dartmouth College administrators themselves, because we need to make them supporters of Dartmouth College Broadcasting as we go forward. So we need to integrate with them. Now, that first audience driving around in our cars is the one that's going to bring in the money that keep the doors open. And during my time here, we were 24-hour student run. My first shift was 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. on a Wednesday, and I could only get one shift because we had freshmen doing all 7 days, 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. And we always talked about being financially self-sufficient. Well, that probably rarely happens year to year, and certainly doesn't happen in the capital costs. So unless you can sell pizza ads over the air to people driving around White River Junction, it's going to be a tough sell to keep Dartmouth Broadcasting on the air. Now, what happens when people stop pulling in a terrestrial radio frequency in their car and start streaming an internet feed? Well, that's when the argument over devices is going to be over, and it's going to be about content. And what content are we going to provide that is going to capture that audience to listen to us, to listen to our ads? And I think we're going to have to, yeah, and we'll talk about that in greater detail. But I think what we need to do is realize that the students running Dartmouth College Broadcasting, when students can get all the music they want for very, very little, all the time, we no longer become the only place they can get their music. We become the gatekeepers to curate their music, to decide what they want to download to their iTunes account. So it gets back to content, and I think ultimately the hardware question is going to settle itself, and we just have to be ready to pump out whatever we're going to do to whatever devices happen to win, whether it's VCR or Betamax.
Well, I think another defensive posture was suggested by Gina with the high fidelity angle. Anyone have any belief that people care about fidelity anymore and might want to buy a nice tuner or something that would... Tim?
I'll take it mostly from an anecdotal point of view. I mean, with the start of CDs in terms of the way that compressed the frequencies down, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, where we've got 3 companies that are still producing a lot of vinyl records, and the argument for the vinyl records is the fact that it preserves all the frequencies. It's got a much wider sound. One of our factories in Nashville is running 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, just producing vinyl records. But I still think that's a specialized audience. I think turntables have had a slight resurgence. I'm not sure the average person cares that much about fidelity as much as they care about variety, or just the ability to get the music.
An HD radio?
I mean, again,
Did you hear anything?
no. When I was at NAB, I specifically looked because we just had that conversation about HD radio, and unless I really looked it up in the index, I didn't find any HD radio being pushed that much versus a lot of the chips. Making sure that, really pushing to make sure that because all it is, it's technically a software problem right now with the reason the chip isn't enabled in these phones. So there's all these devices here that just need to be turned on. And I think the .1s and .2s coming from the television broadcast side, we've had our digital channels for a while, and we're still not making any money off that.
Okay. Any other, before we pivot, as Grant suggested, to the content side, anyone else want to say anything about devices? Okay. By the way, you notice we're not taking time out to define any terms. If you feel like you're out of sync with the terminology they're using, point to your brain, and whoever is speaking will define that term for you. Otherwise, you're just going to move on and assume you know it all. All right. So I guess we've kind of set a stage with devices, and of course with a license for terrestrial broadcasting on 99.3. We've been the beneficiary of a gatekeeping process at the FCC that granted us a license over our challengers. And so part of the reason that we are gatekeepers is because when we went through our own gatekeeping process to get the license, we convinced the FCC that we would be good gatekeepers of content to give to the radio audience. So now we want to know what do listeners want from radio? Is it all podcast? Or, I mean, we've got news people here and a sports guy here. There's certainly things that it would seem like it doesn't have to all be podcast, but even when it is, they might like to have somebody that they respect or somebody they think has good musical judgment choose some music for them, like Surprise Me, maybe. So we'll go down the panel in the same order, starting with Tim. What can we do about our gatekeeper role? Should we be planning to give it up, or should we try to use it in some way that provides value to our listeners?
I think, since we have enough news people on, I'll speak to the music side as far as the gatekeeping goes. I think there's still a very valuable role for gatekeeping on the radio side. I'll quote my last stat from this survey I found a couple weeks ago, that in terms of music discovery, 68% discover new music through friends and family was the highest. AM, FM radio, actually it was a tie, 68%. So music discovery was friends and family first, it was terrestrial radio second. Moving on down, 66% got it from YouTube as far as discovering new music, new artists. 47% from Pandora and 42% from Facebook. So I think there's a huge advantage to radio that in terms of music discovery, in terms of people looking to us to provide information about music. Living as I do in Nashville, Tennessee, where there's a lot of musicians and everyone's trying to get their big break, I think most of the artists I see and I work with, and I just work informally with a few, they think that American Idol and The Voice is where they're going to get discovered, but after that they want to get on the radio. They want to schedule radio interviews, they want to get on a local music show, and I was pleased to hear that we have a local music show here, as we've had since I was in '91 when it was Little Wolf was doing a local radio show. So I think that's an important part that radio plays, is the discovery of music. People are still looking to us to provide music. On the digital side, which is where I work now, I think a lot of people are subscribing to radio station, even email newsletters to find out more about discovery. We're doing a lot of contesting. We're trying to help people discover new music. And I'm not a current radio person, so I'll leave that to you to talk about how the labels are involving with discovery of music with radio, but I still think it's an important part of it. With that, I'll pass it to the news guy.
As somebody who did radio news at radio stations that don't have news departments anymore, every radio station I work for is now almost entirely automated and doesn't have any news gathering apparatus at all. There are just no radio reporters outside of New Hampshire Public Radio in New Hampshire anymore. Just radio stations don't cover news. They might read it, they very rarely cover it. So that's been depressing for me for the past 20 years. And that's because local audiences don't demand it. If they demanded it, there'd be a market for it and there'd be people out covering selectmen's meetings. So I don't think the answer is to send Dartmouth students out to cover Hanover selectmen. We've seen that commercial stations doesn't support that kind of programming. But what we do have is tremendous access to one of the leading institutions in the country. And Dartmouth College Broadcasting can fill a demand for Dartmouth news to people around the country. And we've got access to administrators and artists and athletes and professors and students doing interesting things and people, business people through Tuck. So leveraging the content that we've got on this campus and putting it out, whether it's through a podcast or through a streaming show, or we'll talk about delivery later, getting the content off this campus and out into the world is a tremendously underutilized resource for Dartmouth College Broadcasting. And because, yeah, we're not going to do it just by reading the news and the weather. They can get that on their phone without listening to us.
Sure. So I'll take, I guess, Grant took a point of view on Dartmouth. I'll give you a couple points of view on the rest of the country. I'm not a news guy, so take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Right. But we do own several news stations in our company, and I think what's interesting, we do have several radio stations that have active and vibrant news departments. And in fact, what we've seen, and I'll give you an example of St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is a market where we own 6 radio stations, one of which is WJON, which is an AM news station. We've seen the local newspaper pull back. So a newspaper that had been publishing 7 days a week is now print only on the weekends, digital only during the week, went from having a sales staff of probably 25 to a sales staff of 5 or something like that. And I bring this up because in that market, we've actually expanded our news staff and are sort of out-newsing the newspaper from the standpoint of covering local news. So our website, wjon.com, I encourage all of you to go to it on your smartphone and add to our UV count. Our website actually has more unique visitors than we do CUME on the radio station in that market, which is remarkable, I think, and shows that if you are producing immediate and relevant, at least on the news side, immediate and relevant content, immediacy and relevancy being sort of the key themes there, I do think there's a role for local radio, local news. And then on the music side, which is where I spend most of my time, look, DJs, there's this concept of sharing Spotify playlists and iTunes playlists. DJs have been doing this for 75 years. I mean, that's essentially what curating music has been. So I think I think I told you on the phone before this panel when we spoke, my position has always been that DJs have been blogging since before blogging existed. Like what audio content is on the air is just a form of blogging. It's just today's expression of that is on the internet. But that's what local entertainment has always been about.
But without
So-
that license, we're not as exclusive. They can choose on the web from millions and millions of blogs. So how do we grasp for whatever attention we think we need there?
Produce the best content we can. I mean, I really am of the view that in today's environment, 20 years ago, I think you were in sort of, to borrow an old AOL term, you were in sort of the walled garden if you had a FCC license, and you were competing with a world and a competitive environment where people existed between 89.7 and 107.9, and that was your competitive set. If you're in the radio broadcast business, candidly, if you're in the media business today, and you believe that your competitive set is only 87.9 to 107.9, you're going to be out of business very quickly.
So the name of our station is New Hampshire Public Radio. Some stations around the country experiment with thinking about taking radio out of their name. It's something we've even thrown around, should we be New Hampshire Public Media? We see ourselves as a radio station, but as you said, we think of ourselves as journalists who create compelling content for the web, for your smartphone and on the air, and at some point experimenting a little bit with video as well. So we're thinking much more broadly.
Sarah,
Yeah.
could you, just for the people from outside the listening area, could you tell us what percentage of your programming would be entertainment in FCC and what percent would be news?
Well, I
or
don't know what
public affairs?
the direct percentage would be. I mean, we have, as a public radio station, pretty strict guidelines in what we can broadcast, and our mission is really, for the public good, to inform, to engage, to entertain and to kind of spark people's curiosity. So I mean, we follow. We have, you know, we get money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which has a lot of guidelines in terms of what we need to broadcast and follow. So I work, you know, directly just with the newsroom. So I don't come up with the program schedule for when and why Wait, Don't Tell Me should be on Saturday mornings, or why Car Talk should be on Saturdays and Sundays. That's not really something that I work with. But we have a balance of news and entertainment. And I think you will hear throughout the day, we have newscasts at the top of every hour, and during drive times, the top and the bottom of the hour. You will hear news throughout the entire day if you're listening to NHPR, and that's pretty consistent with public radio stations around the country. And I think, you know, when you talk about gatekeeping, I think more of, again, from a journalism perspective, the role of a curator and the role of, you know, anybody can be reporting however they want, wherever they want, whenever they want. And I think our job is to consistently try to hold ourselves to a high standard in terms of the ethics behind our journalism, and separate ourselves by producing as high quality and compelling content as we can. And we do recognize we can't cover every single thing in the state. As Grant said, there are far fewer journalists in the state in New Hampshire right now than there probably ever has been. The State House has fewer reporters. You know, we have a growing newsroom, but we've got, you know, 7 reporters, give or take, and, you know, some local hosts. I mean, it's not a huge newsroom either. It's still much smaller than newspapers throughout the state. So we really have to pick and choose every day in terms of the content we bring. But the way we think about ourselves digitally, too, is being a curator and finding content that is really strong elsewhere, and talking about that on the air, bringing people on for interviews. I mean, if you know, you mentioned Dartmouth, broadcasting perhaps becoming the source of Dartmouth news. I mean, that is something we struggle with, that there has been news at Dartmouth in the last couple of years where we just, you know, we don't have a reporter based right here. It's not easy for us to cover. But that's something where we feel kind of as curators, we're looking at how other sources around the state are covering news and kind of bringing that to people as well. So we think of ourselves as a curator as well.
So I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on this and look at it from the consumer side as somebody who doesn't have the experience that some of the other members of the panel up here do. But when I think about how I consume media, and I think the word immediacy has been thrown around a little bit, and Dave and I talked about this when we were you know, prepping prior to the panel. For me, it is about immediacy, and I listen to things like sports talk radio or live sports, and you know, taking back to my sports roots even at the station, and wanting to be the first to hear that live, or to hear, you know, banter between 2 sports talk personalities when they mess up, or when they, you know, they get breaking news or whatever that might be. That to me has become really important, and it's interesting to see how, you know, we talk about what makes good content. And for me, it's that live element. I find that live element very compelling, and I know that can be done in a lot of different ways, and it can also be recorded and then consumed as a podcast at a later date, and I've just never found myself doing that. I always found myself wanting to get it live and wanting to be there. And then one other thing that hasn't been thrown around yet that I think is an interesting development is the idea of real-time traffic. And I know I don't know if anyone's from the Boston area, but living in Boston and having to have the pulse of what the traffic is at all times, and when you're trying to get around, you have a station like WBZ, which is an AM station, and their claim to fame is traffic on the 3s. No matter what day, what time, whatever it is, you know, if it's on the 3s, you're getting a traffic report. And I always found that very, very helpful. And now there are actually apps out there that incorporate real-time traffic. So there's this give and take now between, do I want to get it from the radio, or do I want to have Waze on my dashboard telling me how to get around because it's collecting traffic data as well. So it's for me, again, there is something in it from the consumer side to get that live, immediate, you know, whatever it might be. But it's so interesting to see the things that are popping up in the market, even for something like traffic, where you have other options other than what was normally just something you would get on an AM radio station.
And who wants to react?
I'll say one other. I mean, weather is a great example, too. One of the discussions we have at NHPR is, should we give the weather as much as we do in the mornings and afternoons anymore? Because everybody looks at the weather on their smartphone. You know, it's not, but I worked on a morning program in Minneapolis, and you know, it was weather, time, and traffic. Make sure you get those in every few minutes. And, you know, that was just a few years ago, and now that is no longer the mantra, I think, of morning programs or drive time programs.
Well, when you were listening to WBZ, Gino, did you want to have the total curation of a complete news product, including the weather and the the traffic on the threes and all the
Well,
other stuff together?
To be honest, when I first started, I just wanted the traffic. And now it's interesting, as someone who listens to a lot of talk radio, you start to learn what the segment times are. And I find myself knowing when I need to switch from one to the other because, ESPN radio might be on a segment break, but I can actually catch the weather and the traffic on WBZ and then get back in time for the next segment. But no, and actually now I do listen to it for a lot more than that. I actually enjoy, I don't read enough. And I find that I get my news from the AM sources when I'm in my car, when I'm traveling, when I'm going between jobs. That's my opportunity to catch up, and I don't have different devices that are going to do that for me other than the immediacy of, say, a live broadcast on my car radio.
Oh, okay, so there's a couple thoughts there. But, well, the one we can pursue right away is the idea of assembling your content. So you're describing an older listening model of build me my content as opposed to I will punch around, but you're mixing it in a way because you're choosing from one curated channel and another curated channel just on your time schedule. So to that small extent, you're occasionally doing some assembly by punching to a different channel, but for the most part, you've got other things to worry about, and you want to get this passive from your perspective coming at you.
Yeah, and I guess, did someone want to respond to that?
Well, I just want to respond to the comment about live content, and I think TV has seen this challenge even more than radio, and they are just getting destroyed in that people aren't watching their programs at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. They're recording them, they're streaming them. Yeah. Yeah, and so you're seeing sports, awards, and music because they're live, and if you miss them and you're not tweeting them, you're not getting the same experience. So what can we find to put on Dartmouth College broadcasting that is going to mimic that live experience that people better be listening to it right now? Obviously, the hockey game or the football game is going to be part of that. But can we start live streaming some of the great guest lecturers and speakers and events that are going on? Can we team with the college to live stream the music performances and have that become something that we can do? And if they're not listening to it now on Dartmouth College Broadcasting, they're going to miss it.
There's probably some way, Tim, that we can expand homegrown to put more of that music in, if not necessarily live performance, at least talking to the band or something. This is what's happening in music this week. This is this week's episode or today's episode.
I think there's a lot more content we can put around the live broadcast aspect of it, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds over rights issues with things and royalties and stuff, but yeah, I think if you've got a band in the studio with you, you've got the opportunity to ask questions, or you can switch and you can solicit questions from the audience that they can go through digital platforms and send you those questions either in advance or live while it's happening. I've been experimenting a little bit with Periscope and with Facebook Live and with things like that in terms of the interaction you can get while you're doing a live broadcast, in my case specifically, of an artist playing in Nashville, to take requests. Or I was watching, there's an artist friend of mine, Maggie Rose, was in New York yesterday, and I was watching her Periscope from Nashville and then from an airport and wanting to interact with it. So I think the compelling content that started on the terrestrial radio platform is translating into other media, but I still think the AM/FM platform, or specifically FM, gives us that wider, more immediate audience. But I do think there's a lot of other content which then can be easily categorized, tagged, stored for later consumption.
Okay, so it's like your first look or your first listen is through radio, conventional terrestrial radio, and then that's telling you, and Laura, I think, it's getting to the point where everybody is saying, here's what's going in the queue. And some of your TV channels that have the queuing thing that they're trying to train the viewers to look at the TV screen in a different way. So following up on the earlier comment about training the listeners and viewers, we could train them to be thinking, yes, it's going to be downloadable later, but your first listen is radio.
Yeah, and I'd love to get people into the habit of saying, gee, I wonder what Dartmouth College Broadcasting is having. You know, we've got a lecture in the history department, or we've got a performance of a Dartmouth College group that you're not going to have the same rights issues. I mean, yeah, if a band comes to town, you're probably not going to be able to live stream that. That's just it. You're going to run into a rights thicket on that. I was listening to a podcast this week with Louis C.K., who he did his own show. He just produced his own television show. He produced a sitcom outside of the studios. He owns it 100%. He sold it on his own website. And there was some rumor, he went on with Howard Stern talking about how much debt he took out to get the show, I say on the air, but on his website. And so there was all this round of shows about, oh, Louis C.K.'s broke. He went broke producing his own TV show. What he was saying is, no, I haven't made back enough money yet with the season just finished to have it turn a profit, but I'm probably going to have turned a profit on that by the end of the summer, and then I will then own 10 episodes of a TV show forever. And you're seeing Netflix put billions of dollars into building up their library, and Amazon and Hulu. They just want as much content in their library as possible to draw people down the road. So every time we do an event, we've got to make sure that goes in an archive, and we're building up, and we're going back, and we're asking alums to send in their old tapes, and we're building up this archive of Dartmouth College material that nobody else can match. That's a value add for people to come on in and get alumni, get listeners engaged, because I can go back and I can hear a program from 1974 or 1994 or 2014, and I can also listen to something new that's coming up next Thursday. So building up the digital archive of what we've got over the last 75 years of Dartmouth broadcasting, I think could be a tremendous asset. And something that'll draw students in, because then they get access to that incredible asset too.
And it might give us a sense of mission around the production facility, that a future of making sure we have enough studios for enough people to be producing enough stuff simultaneously. So I can do 3 right now. Maybe we should be increasing that. You know, in my time, we had 5 studios that were able to be generating something that could ultimately end up in an archive. So we could do 5 at once. And that, you know, the licensing issues, blah, blah, blah. They're all assumed. Anyone else on that part, the immediacy part, because I want to throw in another dimension if we're ready. Tim?
Actually, while we're on content, and I wouldn't be a sales guy if I didn't bring it up, I think the advertising part of the content, I think the live and the immediate effect of advertising, especially on the broadcast channels, is still one of the most powerful things that radio has, that television has, in terms of being able to reach that large mass audience. And in my day job now, I work in the digital media side, but working with radio and TV broadcasters, and we're still all about selling an advertiser a package of different types of advertising. So they get radio and TV commercials, and they also get maybe some Facebook stuff. Then they, so it's an entire package, which the result being the advertiser just wants more people to buy their stuff, which is always what we've sold. Now we just have a few more platforms, but in the end, and I still see it, I train digital sellers now, and it's still, frustrating to me that the digital, you take traditional radio and TV sellers, and it's still hard for them to sell digital, which means to me that's still a very powerful medium for, if we're talking, I don't know if we're going all the way to 75 years into the future, but at least past the next 5. I think that the terrestrial signal from an advertising point of view, which is content, how to create that compelling content, the copywriters, the people producing the commercials, and even then we're telling our TV commercial people to put their TV commercial on YouTube, because then they'll get a greater reach for it. But that all starts on the terrestrial side, and I still, I think that content on the advertising side is still a very powerful part of
You're
content.
setting up a great pivot for the next dimension I want to introduce into this, and that is the locality aspect. So we all know that we have one signal on terrestrial radio, and our competition in the Upper Valley has multiple signals. They can sell a combo package. But I think a lot of the radio advertising is local. They're trying to sell things that are tangible objects, and people will go to a car dealer that's close to them rather than, WKXL inadvertently carries in Concord, New Hampshire, radio ads for Mercedes-Benz of Fairfield County, Connecticut. It's just a little mistake they make, but that's not doing Mercedes-Benz of Fairfield County any good. So there, at least for some product lines, there's something to be said for locality, that we can offer locality, or we have to put it in the content somehow. So what do you add?
I think the local aspect is important, especially when it comes to, I would say, the majority of our clients at Dartmouth Broadcasting are still local clients, and I think that's been the case for a long, long time. I don't think there's a lot of national clients out there that just, it's even hard for them to buy just one radio station in Hanover, New Hampshire. So I think the effect we have with our local clients and listening to the radio station the past day when I've been here, it's local car dealers, local restaurants. Some of them are still the same from when I was a student back in the early 90s. So that tells me that the radio station is working for them. It tells me that I think if I'm a local owner and I live in the community, there's a big aspect. I think American Express has done a great job with their small business Saturday around Thanksgiving, where they want to help the small businesses out. And I think that's something that Dartmouth Radio has done since we've been selling advertising, is helping the local businesses. So I think the local part of it is very important, even in the digital space now, where you can theoretically, target down to a certain zip code or to geo-target certain things. I still think it's obvious that we have the true local content here, and that's something that the advertisers are interested in, which in turn will help keep us on the air.
Why don't you pass that over to Drew? Grant, I'll get back to you. So Drew is obviously with a big chain that in some ways may be trying to undercut the locality. But do you have any counter comment or advice for Dartmouth Broadcasting on how to survive against?
I actually think we're doing the opposite, David, which is I think we're actually a company that believes very much in live and local. And in fact, I would say that this is really this issue, local, whether it's local advertisers, and I absolutely agree with Tim. I mean, to me, advertising, also because it pays the bills, but to me, advertising is as much a part of the content of the radio station as what is coming out of DJ's mouths and over the air, because local radio is one of the few places where CNA's Pizza and Ramunto's and EBA's, I don't know why I just rattled off 3 pizza places in a row. Maybe, yeah, right. But it's one of the only places where they can actually reach customers in a mass media sense. Yellow Pages has gone away. With all due respect to my friend over here, newspapers is having mixed results, and having and television. Television has, 90 minutes of local content over the course of a day, and the average local television group has, 12, maybe 12 units to sell each day that are true local and not national spots. I mean, in a market like this, 80% probably of our advertising is local advertisers. So, anyway, my point is that's really where radio differentiates itself versus other forms of traditional media, but also relative to the internet as well. So, if nothing else, you got to get that right.
Well, I just want to know, I think we should take a step back and talk about why we care about advertising. Dartmouth Broadcasting is a student organization. It exists as something for students to do and learn from and enjoy and be part of their overall Dartmouth experience. Everything we do has to be driven towards that student experience. The fact that I want to listen to it as an alum is great, but the point is the students who for 4 years are part of it. So why do we care whether we're making enough advertising dollars? We care because the Dartmouth Broadcasting we'd like to do with an actual commercial professional radio station, which is an experience that students at almost any college in the country aren't going to get, is more expensive than Dartmouth College would probably be willing to spend if we didn't have advertising dollars coming in. So it is a secondary goal, but an absolutely vital goal to make sure that we're bringing in advertising revenue, selling pizza and cars. And I think on the web side, on the on-demand streaming side, when we're trying to target some alum in Minneapolis or Sacramento, we're probably looking more at the advertising base that maybe the Dartmouth Alumni Magazine is targeting, instead of what WNNE or our radio competitors are targeting. So bringing in ad dollars is not the goal, but it is a crucial submission in making sure that Dartmouth College Broadcasting is as large and vital and rich in experience for those students compared to non-commercial radio stations at colleges all across the country. We want Dartmouth Broadcasting to be something bigger and better than that.
All right, does NHPR need to jump in there with a comment?
Sure, and I work for a station that is non-commercial, but that by no means I am thinking about revenue often. We want to be able to send our reporters to the Republican and Democratic conventions. You know, we need funding to support that kind of journalism that we want to undertake. And so in public radio we have, it sounds like commercials and advertising, but it's called underwriting. We have sponsorships, we have corporate sponsorships. I think we're finding a lot in starting to think about on-demand content, podcasts, how can we have sponsors? If you listen to Serial, the very popular podcast, you learned about MailChimp, and like they have made a lot of money, and This American Life has made a lot of money through sponsorships of its podcasts. So it's something that we're thinking about in those terms, but we have close to 180,000 listeners a week tune into NHPR, and that is still our main vehicle for how we get our content out, how we connect with listeners. So we have an underwriting sales team. We have people who are really, we focus on what's on the air when you turn on the dial on your radio still. We're not at a point where we are, seeing that we're able to make a lot of money off of digital stories, we've created a political app out of NHPR, but we're not making money off of that now. It's something that we hope to at some point, but we still connect with most of our listeners, make most of our listeners through those fund drives that you hear, those membership drives that come in on the air. That's where most of the money still comes from in public radio, at least at NHPR.
Okay, so hold on to that,
Yeah.
because also I'd like to hear about your take on the locality aspect. So you're trying to get a set of signals that collectively will cover this triangular-shaped state.
Right, through the mountains.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about breaking down to smaller local units, or do you feel challenged by these
It is.
very local?
Yeah, sometimes, I think being a statewide network is a big challenge. If you are in, just covering the Boston market, say you have kind of a more defined geographic area, but we are trying to be a lot of things to a lot of different people, and even though New Hampshire is not an enormous state, it does have very distinct regions. And so we are, I think we have been talking about local journalism for decades as a way to grow listeners for certain markets. So I think that we have a reporter based on the Seacoast. We have two up in the North Country. Most of our reporters are in Concord. We just added a Southern New Hampshire reporter. The next two plans are for an Upper Valley reporter and then a Monadnock region reporter. So, yeah. We're really thinking in terms of regional, but we're not thinking that, that if we have a reporter in the Upper Valley, they're not going to be at, say, a Hanover or a Lebanon town meeting, like a zoning meeting or something. We're not going to go on that level. We're not going to try to run all of the news. Like our Seacoast reporter is not reporting on that region the same way that a Portsmouth Herald reporter is. We are trying to cover an entire state, find the issues that resonate through the entire state. So we're thinking not just of New Hampshire either, though. We're thinking of ourselves as a New England region. We know that people in New Hampshire care about, obviously, our neighbors in Vermont and Maine and Massachusetts. They also care what's happening in Connecticut. There's a really strong regional identity. So we're also starting a New England News Collaborative, where we are having all the public radio stations in New England collaborate together and share stories. So that's, we're really thinking if we want to attract new listeners, we want to engage with people, we want to keep them coming to NHPR for news, we've got to offer up, of course we're offering the international news, the national news, which we get from NPR, from the BBC, from other producers as well, but we're really thinking locally. We want to be a strong source for news in New Hampshire and the entire New England region.
And you won't have to worry about how much paper you're using up, like the Union Leader is kind of limited by the cost of paper.
Yeah, well, but not so much anymore in terms of the website and digitally. I mean, there is kind of no boundaries on any medium.
Yeah, the newspaper is turning into possibly another kind of a overview pointer sampler kind of thing that if you need more depth, follow this link that's printed in the newspaper.
Yeah. I mean, one of the big concerns I have as people start to be able to pick and choose and curate their own content and jump from what they want. I mean, NPR has a new app out called NPR One. And what you can do is download this and you will get a mix of the national stories and NHPR's local stories, or wherever you are in the country, your local station will populate some stories in there as well. But what it does is when you, if you're not interested in, say, an environmental story, and you can swipe right past it onto the next story, it starts to know what you're interested in and not interested in. So it won't start feeding you more environmental stories because it's figured out you're not really into those. So the one worry I have kind of as we start to create all of these new ways to get content is what was so great about just turning on the radio is you didn't know what you might be interested in. You didn't know what you didn't know. And you were exposed to a story out of Turkey or, Iceland, who knows where. And, to some degree, that won't happen in the same way as we become more and more isolated in our own social circles, our own media circles that we've created. And so that's, one of the concerns I have too, where I want to make sure that people are hearing and know something about their community and their state and their region, and making sure that that gets in front of people. And I do worry to some degree that you might just swipe over these sorts of stories, and what that will mean for young people growing up, like what kind of connections will they have with their local community?
So that's a concern that we share across all the media, I guess. There'll be just so much assemble it yourself that nobody has anything in common. Dhruv?
I was just going to respond because I think Sarah said something so insightful, which is there is a sense as mass media, traditional media changes, and people get more of their news and information through social media channels, it creates sort of this echo chamber where, I go, I'm not going to tell you what side of the political aisle I fall on, but when I'm on my Facebook feed, I see a stream of people who think and talk about issues exactly like I do. And my guess is most people who go on see that same thing. So you think to yourself, boy, everybody in the world must think exactly the same thing that I do, and therefore my point of view is right because everybody else thinks it. One of the beauties of radio or newspaper, the opinion page of the newspaper, was that you would hear divergent points of view all the time, and you never, as a result, your brain was never conditioned to I'm always right and everybody else thinks like I do. And that is one of the things that's getting lost in sort of the evolution of our media, I think.
Okay, I'm a little concerned about this collaboration across the public radio stations or the public radio services of the New England states. It seems like it would not be possible for Dartmouth Broadcasting to join that, not so much because we couldn't contribute in, but if we took something out, we would be running it on our station with advertising. Would that violate a compact that you have among the public radio stations that it's all listener-supported services, that everybody's contributing something that was generated through the same funding model?
Well, I think kind of two sides to that. I think most stations are becoming less territorial. At least I feel like NHPR is, and I feel much less territorial about this is our story. Once we have it, we have a lot of newspapers around the state will pick up some of our stories from time to time. I just feel like we want to get great stories out there in front of people. So it wouldn't be thinking we don't want others to have it. I think in this specific case, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting put out a call for projects around the country, and this was kind of the initial funding that we got to create this collaborative for the next 2 years. After that, we'll kind of form it ourselves. But I think, on a very specific level, I think that the fact that there's CPB funding for public media for the first 2 years would keep, Dartmouth Broadcasting out of it for now.
So if anything, we would have to join some aggregation of commercial stations that had some interest in news. By the way, is there anybody, show of hands, who thinks that we have a reason for Dartmouth to do a non-commercial broadcasting operation? Is there anyone who thinks there would be a benefit from that? Apparently not. Okay, so we can proceed thinking that in this room, we're in an echo chamber where we're all convincing ourselves that we should continue to have that advertising content, and it does have the benefit of it's local. Okay.
Are you asking if that question instead of having a commercial operation or in addition to having a commercial operation?
So first, instead, I think that was pretty clear that anyone who thought I was asking instead, no. But what if we had both? Not that there's any licenses left, but let's say there's a couple, okay, 3 or 4 people. Now, we're a little bit technically hampered here in getting everything for the recording. There are some 3x5 cards there if you need to get your comments up to me to make sure that it's injected into the conversation. But Grant, go ahead.
Yeah, well, we do have both, and we have DCR. It just happens to be web only. And towards the end of my time on the Board of Overseers, Bob's here, and George, and these guys, one of the toughest decisions we had to make was giving up that AM signal. And we had a transmitter that was costing a fortune to keep running on a signal that had trouble getting out to the river cluster. And the listenership on terrestrial AM radio, on quite frankly a very weak signal, just couldn't justify itself anymore. So DCR, a number of years ago, made the transition to web only, but that is still a non-commercial radio broadcast. It just isn't necessarily.
We could pick a program on WebDCR that's good enough and consistent enough and say, we're going to sell ads on this WebDCR program.
Yeah, and DCR no longer has the FCC restriction to be non-commercial, but it's still got a non-commercial soul.
Yeah, and the listenership might not be enough to attract anybody.
Yeah, but you can be non-commercial and still have underwriting and still have sponsors, and I don't think we should start turning down money. But yeah, I think having a commercial radio station that presents itself to the Upper Valley no differently than the other commercial stations there. We don't put out front, hey, we're Dartmouth students. We put it out there as a radio station. And WebDCR is a Dartmouth product, and it doesn't make any pretension about being anything other than a Dartmouth product. And I think it's good to have both streams.
Okay, so a little time check here. We've used up our first hour. We're going to end about 3:30 in the formal discussion, but there's nothing else on the schedule till 5, so we can all stay here. Those of us who want to keep talking, I'm deliberately diverging a lot, introducing a lot of new subjects, so there'll be a lot more stuff to talk about. It's going to be hard to get everything in. And one more thing on this, the content part from the listener pull or listener demand side is interactivity. Anyone want to jump in with a first comment about would that be good for us? Gino, looks like you're there for. If we did something more than we're already doing to offer an interactive component, how would that help us?
Well, to be honest, I'd have to brush up a little bit in terms of what interactivity we're offering now. But I'm speaking to a little bit about what I hear a lot on the air these days. It's not the traditional call-in anymore. I mean, I feel like even sports talk radio, which used to thrive on the banter of call-in people who didn't know what they were talking about or really did know what they were talking about, Now it's the 1-800-Flowers Twitter account, or whatever, some sponsor on an online mechanism where people are collecting this type of communication. And I'm sure, I know that we have Twitter accounts and we have Facebook pages and all that kind of stuff, but even in the live realm now, people are reading tweets as opposed to taking calls. And I've found that fascinating because there's so much content that needs to be curated if you are a big show and there's tons of stuff coming in. How do you decide what to then bring to the air? And even in your role now, if you got flooded with index cards, how are you deciding what to bring to the air? So just thinking a little bit about how that's changing how people are interacting. But then I think about myself, I'm driving. I can't tweet to the radio host that I want to ask this question. I would like to call in or maybe have that opportunity. So that's kind of been my perspective recently, is seeing the different ways in which, whether it be a radio jock or even a live broadcast of a sporting event, how those people and those personalities are communicating in very different ways and not the traditional call-in model that we saw a lot of with radio early on.
Well, so I might take a traditional point of view that, boy, I feel like there's something to be gained by having the broadcasting model, which we are licensed for, the one-way flow, that there's some gatekeeping happening. I'm getting a good feed of entertainment and information, whatever I want. Maybe I have to assemble it myself by punching over. But it looks like Grant wants to comment on this too. The interactivity I've seen so far reduces the value. It's less good content than the curated content, so why do I want it? And so I want to hear more justification if this is something that's good for our future.
Yeah, I mean, the radio station is going to take requests, and the vast majority of your listenership is never going to call in and have a request. And that's something that having actual live DJs allows you to do that having automation doesn't. And it's not that most people will call in with a request, but they know it is. And every time they hear somebody calling in from West Leb requesting Slipknot, they know, well, there's an actual person listening to what we're doing, playing the song we want to hear. That's great. And Sirius can't do that in any meaningful way, and because the caller coming in could be from anywhere in North America. What I care about more from a newspaper side, let's say we've got an editorial or a story that we want out there, I don't want our audience feeding back through us through social media. I want them pushing our story out to a new audience in social media. And the value of Twitter, Instagram, Facebook isn't them telling us we're right or wrong. I mean, I try to stay away from our own comments section. They're pretty awful. But we do follow when we put a story up and we put a link on Facebook to that story, the shares that has and the new audience that it gets out to. So we want to turn our social media audience into ambassadors for our content, saying there's this great interview, or there's this new song that Chris Garrett's playing on the Rock and Go Morning Show, or whatever it is, whatever content we have, we want to turn our listeners into salesmen that are pushing that content out and reaching a new audience, because when they push our content out, they push our advertisers out with them, and that's something we can monetize.
At its most abstract level, they're saying, look at what good gatekeepers these guys are.
Yeah. No, that's what they're doing. And people get their political information, they get their music information, they get it from their neighbors, friends and neighbors that they know online. Their circle of friends is their gatekeepers. So we get, into their walled garden, and they say, hey, come on in and look what I found. You're getting it from a trusted source instead of, and I think that is immensely more valuable than, say, a promoted tweet or a promoted Facebook mention, is having somebody share it with their circle. And that's how you get virality, to get something out there to people that didn't know you were there. And hopefully they'll click through, they'll get to your content, and you'll turn them into a new listener.
Yeah, it may have some interesting interaction with advertising models too. Gino?
Yeah, and it made me think of something that I did recently on the idea of immediacy. So in my video production company, I was filming a speaker series at the Harvard Innovation Lab. So they're bringing in people to talk to the students who are up-and-coming entrepreneurs. And I didn't understand why this person was being invited, but it was Black Thought, or Tariq Trotter. He's a singer-songwriter for The Roots. And I knew nothing about this, but apparently the person who was filming with me was a huge fan, brought his albums to get signed and everything. But to make a really long story short, in the middle of his talk, the person who's interviewing him asked him if he wanted to freestyle for the audience. And he, for 4.5 minutes, just freestyled, and it was unbelievable. And everyone had their phones up, and they're trying to capture this content. And the client, the person I was working for, came up to me afterwards and says, "We need to get that online as quickly as possible because all these other people captured it. We want to be the ones that are getting pushed out, not somebody's random iPhone." So of course I had to stay up till midnight that night, cutting this piece, getting it out on the web. And since then, it's been their most talked about and their most watched video that they've ever put out in the 4 years that they've existed. And it was that virality idea that other people picked it up. Other people even ripped our YouTube version, took the Harvard branding out of it, and then put it on their own Twitter page, which is a whole other issue when you talk about copyright and branding. But within 4 days, millions and millions of views. And it was absolutely incredible how important that immediacy was for them to get it out there. And good thing we put the Harvard watermark in that they couldn't remove, which was nice. But it just, you made me think a little bit about that in terms of virality and using these social networks as a way to get your brand out or to get your content out and let other people be the ambassadors, because Harvard putting it out is one thing, but your friend putting it out and just so happening that it came from Harvard is another, because then I want to go read it because my best friend thinks it's cool, or my mother thinks it's cool. I'm going to go take a look. So.
Okay, last call before wave 3. Tim, back to Tim. So you have a lot and a good pivot for wave 3, but go ahead.
Just last on interactivity. I mean, I think when the interactivity on the web and everything first started, and from a broadcast side, none of our news people wanted to hear from their audience because it was they weren't used to it. They were used to being broadcasters going out one way. All of a sudden we had a two-way channel that at least it's not like it was two-way back out to the audience. We could, but they weren't used to that kind of a feedback, because most people would write letters to the editor or something, and that took a few days. Yeah. I think from an advertiser point of view, it is very important in terms of our content that goes viral, or just something that, proves to the advertiser visually that they can see that there is some, there's somebody listening, there's somebody watching. Whereas before they might have been operating in a vacuum, except when someone walked into their store and bought something, and no one ever says they heard it on the radio, no matter how many times you put it in a commercial. Everyone tries to do that, but at least now if you could share a coupon, if you could share, something, it gives us a feedback loop, which gives us yet another, even if we're not charging the advertiser for it gives us something to prove that our media is working for them.
Yeah, and I guess another immediate local and a live angle would be if we do remote broadcast from an advertiser. That another thing that we should keep in our arsenal, it sounds like, for terrestrial radio. I'll comment.
I'll just comment on that. I mean, and Drew, maybe you want to chime in on it. You do a lot of events and things. I mean, from our point of view, from a doing a live broadcast from a client, we were always telling them the value was in the airtime that you were getting, that we were talking about it on the air, because a lot of times you didn't want to see the people that showed up to these remotes looking for a free hot dog. So I think, a lot of times that value was overstated to the client in terms of who would be coming into your store, but the talking about it was what the value was.
Okay. Then to Drew, do you have a rejoinder to that?
No, I think it's accurate. I think the value to the client depends on what the specific promotion is. So if I'm at a car dealer and I'm giving away tickets to a hot show that's coming to town, then I think you're going to have, it's not just about the promotion, it's actually about the people that can come in through the door and that are there for the tickets. So I think it's a mixed bag. There's remotes and there's remotes, if you know what I mean.
Okay, hold on to that microphone. For wave 3, we'll go Drew, Grant, Sarah, and then Tim and Gino. And quickly, I'm going to have to repeat it, by the way.
Okay, it's a question for Sarah. I don't know what kind of news organizations at the radio station now. I understand a lot of people don't look to local radio for news, but you're looking for somebody to do reporting in the Upper Valley. We have a lot of inspiring journalists here. Even if they don't go to radio, they go to TV or another thing. Would you ever consider working with the radio station? Because they've got the equipment, they've got the bodies, they have access. Setting up an arrangement where you'd be using students kind of as stringers, and they could get the stories to you.
Yeah, I'm nodding. Yes.
Okay, so the question was, would New Hampshire Public Radio consider using Dartmouth students, possibly Dartmouth broadcasting students, as stringers or contributors to their content.
Oh, sure. I think that's the way we have to be thinking, too, in terms of partnerships with strong organizations around the state. And I worked as a faculty member at the University of Missouri for a while in the broadcast journalism department. And the public radio station there only uses students as the reporters. So I have a lot of experience actually working with students, kind of training them, working with them. And we had such great content out of students. And, I think we have to be thinking smartly about how the resources that are around the state. And also one of the other sides of that is so much of the discussion is how can we attract younger people to public radio. We know that we have people in their 40s and 50s and 60s listening to public radio and older, but how do we get younger people? And one of the ways we talk about doing that is getting young people on the air, that young listeners can identify with. That is something, and we use the studios here a little bit, like if we have a guest who's on our talk show, The Exchange, who's in the Upper Valley or a Dartmouth professor or something, they'll be in the Dartmouth studios. That's about as far of a partnership as we've ever had, but you have a facility here and a lot of bright young students, so I think it would be worth talking about.
Okay,
Yeah.
back to Grant.
Actually, if anybody hasn't gone and seen the new studios after the remodel, the open house, I was over there just before the panel talking with Heath Cole about this, and they've been doing a lot of that. They've been taking advantage of the fact that we've got great studios and an ISDN line, so that now Dartmouth, the administration, sees Dartmouth Broadcasting as the way to connect Dartmouth to outside media. So I think he tells the story that President Hanlon was on some national interview, and it just sounded lousy. And it turns out that they were, Dartmouth Communications was recording him in some closet over in Parkhurst on bad equipment and then pumping it out. And he said, have you guys seen how much money you've put into our studios? Come over here. We'll give you an ISDN line, and he says, like Domino's Pizza, 20 minutes, he'll make you sound like a rock star. So that is part of Dartmouth Broadcasting that we might not actually ever put out on our air, but it is part of that student experience that Dartmouth College students are setting up these interviews and getting experience providing content, producing an interview for the New York Times or National Public Radio or the BBC, whatever that outlet is. That is a tremendous resource that isn't our primary product, isn't our secondary product, but is a use of the resources we have that gives students an experience that they wouldn't otherwise get.
Grant, I'm going to pivot on that to wave 3. Again, it's Dhruv, Grant, Sarah, Tim, Gino. And this is about the opposite direction. When someone has some content they want to produce, whether it's a news type content, entertainment, could be radio drama, as we heard about this morning, could be a new kind of music. What should Dartmouth Broadcasting try to do in terms of positioning with the student body or any other Dartmouth affiliated person that would want to use the facilities? How should we build that into what the organization does? So again, this is what we've been talking about has been more of a listener demand. Now we're going to creator push. Creators have something great, might be a brand new idea in sound. And we should be, because it's the Dartmouth student body, a set of people that produce a lot of great new sounds. So can we do that? Can Dartmouth Broadcasting step up to a higher plane of being the workshop or the production company or whatever it's going to be? What do you think? Dhruv?
Well, certainly from an entertainment perspective, from an audio entertainment perspective, I think we've always sort of been that Dartmouth Broadcasting. I think if you're asking about video production, if you're asking about other forms of media and entertainment beyond the audio, then I think it's candidly, I think it's just an equipment issue. But as far as I think the philosophical point of your question, which is, can and should Dartmouth Broadcasting be a home for creative people at this school? The answer should be, I hope, unequivocally yes. Just like radio in general is the home of creative and eccentric people all over the world. So I think sure.
Yeah, there's a lot that students can do with, a Spotify playlist or GarageBand or whatever. They can produce their own podcast. They don't need us for that. What can we do to improve the quality and to get it out to an audience so that we're making them better broadcasters and training people to be broadcasters and establishing a standard of quality that we're going to say, once you get good enough, we're going to get you good enough that you can then be part of the product that we push out, whether it's over the air on 99.3 or whether it's on WebDCR or whether it's in an archive of Dartmouth programming, that we're going to make sure that the quality is good enough that people are going to want to listen to that. You're going to want to aspire to do that, and you will have a better product for going through that than just producing it on your own in your dorm room.
Okay, so a continuing value of there being gatekeepers. Like, let's say in the next 75 years, the world is not going to go in such an upheaval that gatekeepers are irrelevant.
There should be a hurdle to get on our air. And again, when I was a freshman, you had to go through a week of training, hours a day. You had to do an hour-long air check with an experienced jock. And then you had to take a written test, because I think I was one of the last years that actually you had to get an FCC license to run a board. And you don't have to anymore, but I'm still a licensed broadcaster. I kind of like that.
Well, I'm not sure how I can truly answer that question, or if I can kind of take a spin on it in terms of when we're hiring young reporters for our newsroom, what we're looking for are people who are creative and bright, who have a knowledge of, not only their tiny community, their school life, but seem to have an interest and an awareness of the community, at a regional level, a national level, and an international level, and a deep curiosity about what's happening in the world, and then to have some sort of familiarity with what sounds good, like how to tell a story, how to communicate with people clearly and in a way that draws people into a story. So, if Dartmouth Broadcasting is able to give students a place where they can develop those skills and start to perfect their on-air delivery and start to really pay attention to broadcasting, that is something that I think, in the journalism industry, those are the traits, we're not necessarily, at least I'm not looking for somebody who's been a reporter who has done day-to-day reporting. I'm looking kind of for those bigger, that sort of person who has an awareness and understanding and curiosity and can communicate. And I think that experience, being in front of a microphone, having to put together content, thinking about what makes sense for an audience is invaluable.
And I would like to mentor or inspire somebody to produce new kinds of radio commercials that have not yet been heard, something new in advertising, so it could work that way too. All right, we'll switch over to Gino.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to jump in because I don't know if anyone attended the panel previous to this one where a Dartmouth professor in the Latin American Studies program actually requires his students come in and produce a small show as part of their coursework. And I found that fascinating because I would have never connected the dots, but when he started explaining why, it was a little bit of what we're alluding to here, is just kind of getting a feel and experience of what it takes to actually produce something of high quality, in addition to also learning about why you're curating this content or putting it together. And I think that's really, really cool. And for me, for someone who was on the sports side, I think somebody used the sink or swim expression at an earlier panel. There wasn't a lot of people in the department at that time, and I was kind of thrown on the air, and it was sink or swim. And luckily, I swam pretty well and enjoyed it and was able to kind of build from that. But to think now about giving the students that opportunity with, hopefully, I think the idea of mentorship came up, or some more guidance, so that the content that's being created, when you look at all the crap that can go up on YouTube these days and some of the gems that people find, how are those gems being produced and what's behind them? And is it mentorship? Is it guidance? Is it something like an opportunity to work at a station while you were in college? I never thought about doing anything like this. And then my senior year, my buddy came up to me and said, hey, you know a lot about sports. Why don't you give it a try? And almost pursued a career in sports broadcasting. So took a weird pivot and had an engineering degree and found myself making videos, but that's a whole other story. But I do think it's important that the students have this outlet in a way that even if they don't want to be on the air, they can come in even as part of a course and get that experience and feel what it's like and have an appreciation for the quality level and the amount of work that goes into it.
Yeah, and while you're handing that to Tim, I would point out also that I'm synthesizing from what you're saying, Gino, that we have not just the ability to get them, if they want to create music, but if they want to show what good curators they can be, we can give them a showcase for, here's my playlist that I picked, or whatever it might be. Tim?
Just, I'll touch on two things I don't think we've talked about as far as this. So first, when I was here as a student, my only A was thanks to the Dartmouth radio station, because I had an electronic music course and I had access to those studios. So I think just having access to that equipment was a great thing. And I think that if we can offer that to students that, obviously with training, would just have access to, tens of thousands of dollars worth of audio equipment up there is great. The other thing I think in terms of the experience with students that we really haven't brought up, which I think is interesting, it came up a lot this morning, was just the management experience. If someone gets that involved to be on the directorate, or even my business manager when I was general manager, she had no interest whatsoever in being on the air, but she wanted to get involved in the business side of things. And I think, that's something that, if students want to be involved more at this is a working business, and that's the type of experience they want. Maybe they never want to be on the air, maybe they don't want to do anything like that. But just to have the experience of organizing or project managing or things like, Matt, you've put this whole thing together. That's a huge amount of experience. Putting this something like this together. So I think that's just other aspects of Dartmouth Broadcasting that you could take advantage of.
And in the charter of our panel, I think we have to always keep in mind, why do we have a broadcasting license? Do we want to, we had a license for AM, turned out not to be so valuable after a certain amount of time, and nobody has applied for it since we turned ours in. So I guess that changed. Is the same going to happen for FM? So that's sort of the charter. And we are very close to the end here. Anyone have a burning desire to respond on the creator push kind of point? You feel like we've said we want to be a good home for people who want to be creative in audio, and that's a nice, uplifting, positive note on which to end the formal part of this seminar. And now we will just break up. I see that there's a half-eaten cake over there. So the panelists should get their fair turn. And Matt, you have a couple housekeeping announcements or other things to say before we break up. So
Can I just get a round of applause for these panelists?